Hello and welcome to our webinar, Five Strategies for Getting the Most from AI. I'm Paul Michelman, Editor-in-Chief of MIT Sloan Management Review, and I will be your moderator today. This event will be recorded and will be available to all attendees approximately 3 to 4 business days after the end of the live event. We welcome your questions for our speaker today. To submit questions, please enter them anytime in the chat box in the lower corner of your screen, or you can submit questions on Twitter using the hashtag #MITSMREvent. We'll answer as many questions as time permits. If you're having any audio difficulties while listening via computer, please call in via telephone instead, or check the help link in the upper part of your console. Our speaker today is Jacques Bughin, a senior partner in the Brussels office of the management consulting firm McKinsey Co, and a director of the McKinsey Global Institute. Our thanks go out to Cloudera for their sponsorship of this webinar. And now on to our presentation, 5 strategies for getting the most from AI. Jacques, over to you.
Thanks, Paul, for the introduction. I'm obviously extremely delighted to share some of the insight from different types of works I've been conducting in terms of artificial intelligence and its implication for the best corporate use. Those insights obviously come from many sources. Some of them become quite clear from client work. Some of them are coming from fundamental research I've been personally conducting within McKinsey and within the McKinsey Global Institute. Before I start about the 5 strategies to make the most use of AI, I personally want to define what AI is all about and give you a bit of perspective about what we are framing as a discussion today. So from a definition point of view, my vision about artificial intelligence is artificial intelligence exhibited by machines with cognitive functions that are associated to humans. Cognitive functions include all aspects of perceiving, reasoning, learning, and problem solving. Now, if you think about this definition, then you got artificial intelligence tools like computer visions, like programming languages, like in smart robotics and virtual assistants, all of them underpinned by machine learning and big data. That's the definition of artificial intelligence that I will be using today in the discussions about what AIs can do for corporate usage. Now, before I even go to what exactly is happening, there are just 2 fundamental questions that people always ask about AI. The very first one is that, is this technically at the point of really being interesting for companies to consider these technologies? And the second one is obviously, if you believe technically it's going to be interesting to apply these technologies, how far are we in terms of diffusion of these technologies, and what kind of evidence do we have to really make some predictions, as I would like to be doing today? Now, on the very first questions about the technical aspect of those technologies, again, the statement I want to make is that I've been personally skeptical that maybe we're going to still be in a context of a new spring for artificial intelligence, but maybe the technology is not yet there in terms of being fully scalable. Now, to be quite clear, from a functional point of view, not from a global artificial intelligence point of view, we believe that the functional aspect of AI is actually technically very, very strong. Consider this element of computer vision. Human typically will have 95% things right from a visual perspective. The 5% has been always the random error that we face today, simply because sometimes we don't see correctly. We all start to be a bit using glasses and you name it. Now, if you were trying to do the same thing from the perspective of machines, roughly 5 to 6 years ago, the best you can get by comparing any type of big data from the computer vision, let's say, of an animal, like in the slides, the point is that roughly 1/4 of the time, you're going to be pretty much blurred and mistaken. Now, obviously, if you imagine the computer vision will be 1 out of 4 times pretty much wrong, it's obviously very difficult to imagine that you can possibly use computer vision as an effective tool to have driving cars. No, but think 1 minute more and look at the right-hand side of the chart, 2016, 2017, the improvement in the algorithms composed with big data and improvement in algorithms tells you today that pretty much it's really a random error that we face. 97% of the time, the machine can actually discriminate and identify very correctly the kind of picture that we have. So our belief is today, this is really for prime time. Now, the next question is that if the technical abilities are there, how far are we in terms of people or companies using these technologies? Now, obviously, if you think about AI as a set of technologies, we can think about other set of technologies. We can think about the very first set of web technologies, i.e. the connectivity part of it. And today, bottom line is pretty much a done deal. Pretty much every organization that we know of are using these technologies. Everybody of us have basically connectivity on the mobile, on the PC, you name it, and pretty much end-to-end whatever the functions that we are occupying in terms of the enterprise. 70% of the companies in Europe, for instance, are pretty much using that end-to-end. Now, there's still a few, 4%, not using that, but it's usually a one-man show type of companies or very new companies and the like. But typically, bottom line, this is down. Now, if you think about cloud big data technologies, we are pretty much at 30% of companies stating that they basically use and leverage this technology from the full enterprise perspective. But if you look at new technologies of automation and AI, frankly, we are at best at 3 to 5%, depending on the statistic that we look at. So again, this is very early days in terms of diffusion of these technologies. And on top of that, from the 3 to 5, I would say that possibly 2 points of the 3 are pretty much digital natives, and possibly not some of you listening to what I just said in terms of incumbents. This being said, I think we can say as well that even if this is the early days, we've got enough of evidence for what I will try to convince you to do regarding AI. Why? Because at the end of the day, even if the number of companies are still in the early days, we start to see a lot of use cases. We have actually compiled more than 700 real use cases of application of AI tools. And from there, we can derive a lot of very interesting insight in terms of the feasibility, the technical ability, the finance element, the ROI of this use case. Added to that, as I told you, we have done at McKinsey extensive research informed by the analysis of the use case to understand a bit more about what's the motivation for companies to use AI. And actually, we have done that with 3 independent sources, 3 different surveys. And in fact, we are very comfortable with the results we have because the results are pretty much converging. They basically state pretty much the same patterns in the data. And finally, obviously, McKinsey is always good in trying to handle data. And in one way, we did quite a bit of statistical analysis that help us to at least give some guidance on the prediction and the simulation that I will show you in the next few minutes. So AI is everywhere. As I said, even if 3% of the companies are using AI on the kind of a end-to-end enterprise space, we have a lot of cases where AI is being used. And this is a reflection of the type of case that we've seen from the sample of companies where we have been trying to understand the logic and the economics of all this AI use case. First observation, if you look from this perspective, give and take each of the AI tools I was mentioning, from computer visions to advanced robotic to language, give and take, it's 20 to 25% of the time it's used somewhere. So we're not there yet of 100% of the case where they are used, but 25% is already a big number. Second observation as well, you see that if you look at customer service, for instance, as a business domain, virtual assistant is pretty much where we see the most frequent use of AI as a use case. And in operations, no surprisingly as well, it's going to be in advanced robotics that we see that. Though in practical terms, these cases, I'm quite sure you have your own, but I can give you a few of those in very practical terms. Research and development, by the way, McKinsey has bought Quantum Black, and Quantum Black has been quite famous for the fact that they were using, deep learning algorithms in machine learning to try to optimize everything that is related to the effectiveness of a Formula One car driving. And again, I think the data collections from the IoT and the sensors of the car led to fundamental redesign about the car, about how a car could be driven and so on, so that you can win the 1 or 2 extra seconds to win a race. Customer service, my experience of customer service and the virtual assistants confirmed the reason why so many people are looking at that. Now, I will not quote a few, supply side name of that, but again, if you think about a virtual assistant like Amelia, the experience we have had in Amelia and rolling out Amelia across different sectors, from banking to telecom service and so on, the numbers are actually quite solid. 90% of the time, you get a first call right, sometimes up to 95%. Most of the time, the calls are pretty much taken in the next 5 seconds. And by the virtue of the machine, Amelia is actually operational 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and is consistently answering the questions, up to the point that when we ask actually some of the customers of our clients whether they knew that Amelia was a virtual assistant and not a real person in the call center, pretty much 1 person out of 2 came to be wrong in stating that the assistant was actually virtual. Now, on robotics as well, the 50% that you see on the operations side, you've seen a lot of the case starting to happen on that side. I still like the case of Amazon just for the principle of that. If you think about when Amazon in 2012 bought Kiva and started to roll out this kind of robotics into the logistics of the retail chain. So obviously the business problem of Amazon is simple in logistics, to make sure the click to ship is as sure as possible, and the shipment and the handling of the logistics is as efficient, as effective as possible. Now, the fact is that today, this advanced robotics possibly get 20% of the OPEX down versus an individual. The click to ship is no longer 60 to 75 minutes, but much more 15 minutes. And the handling of the pick and pack can be done in possibly half the square meters that is usually required in retail. So the total of these 3 aspects of the economics make the ROI of the case in the range of 50 to 100% just by itself. So no surprisingly, we state that AI is everywhere, so we got enough of evidence and case studies to start saying, okay, from this example of the use case, what should you be doing? Now, I tried to summarize that in 5 key themes, and from these themes, I will try to create some implication directly. The 5 key themes that the management needs to know about AI are the following. The very first one is that when we talk about artificial intelligence, most of the use cases are actually more attractive when we think about them from an innovation product service perspective, i.e. growth, more than efficiency, even if efficiency and automation is part of the economics of the use case. Point number 2 is that if you have AI is a technology tool or a technology environment, that technology requires obviously some skills to be complemented. And in fact, I will argue that the best returns to AI are actually people, from the managerial side of how do you roll out AI, but also from the technical side about the complement of skills that you need to complement the smart capital that you roll out. Point number 3, which is a consequence of number 1, if you want to go for growth, don't go for growth for a marginal product economics, just go for a bold move, which is usually very difficult to do because you have to radically change the supply chain and the business system that you have. But we believe that an offensive strategy is the one that's really going to make a difference. Point number 4, is that AI is indeed a set of tools, but is a set of tools that possibly will turbocharge, in my own words, will turbocharge the digital foundation and the digital transformation journey that you have been into it. So thinking that AI is great, I can leapfrog because I haven't done my first digital transformation is likely to be quite challenging. There is just so much learning on digital foundation and digital transformation journey that you have had. It's very difficult to basically say, I'm going to leapfrog and just bypass the first wave and go on AI. I think it's important to make sure that you do the digital foundation and indeed very fast. And point number 5, yes, indeed, we can think about business model of ecosystem, but most of the time today, AI is not necessarily fully mature, requires different type of skills, requires possibly cooperation in the ecosystem. So we believe that thinking very quickly about the ecosystem and being slightly more centric in the thinking about what does AI tool will bring to my company is quite fundamental. Now, if I take the implication of these 5 points, and I will go each one by one, the first one is quite important. The fact that IT is more about growth than efficiency. The growth that you will possibly achieve with AI is possibly at the expense of competitors, and that competitors will have no choice than to itself invest in AI. So we got enough of evidence to say there is no value of waiting for waiting, and in fact there's likely to be you should jump on the race, and there will be a technology race. Point number 2 is that if the best returns to AI are people, I think that on top of leadership, HR is likely to be the next job of the future. We've talked a lot in digital about the chief digital officer. We talked before the chief strategic officer, but we believe that is the time of the CHRO, because the new skill set and the combination of the skill sets to make AI work is likely to be very different from what we have seen in the last industrial revolution. Point number 3, the bold and the light, means as well that it's about thinking about what's new that you want to be doing. So it's a reinvention more than marginal economics of the use case. And some of the use cases are extremely attractive at the marginal economics, but it's above all trying to reinvent yourself, even if it hurts and it's actually cannibalize what you've been doing in the past. Point number 4, as I said, AI, digital foundation, is actually quite important. AI will turbocharge digital, but digital is important to make sure that AI can turbocharge that. So you're going to still have to do your digital transformation, and AI is actually not the share of the cake, but the turbocharging of the system of transformation that you are possibly already involved in. And point number 5, the consequence of that is that please not only be allocentric, but think strategically as to what component of the ecosystems you want to play and how do you leverage them. Because today the evidence is very strong that even on the supply side, the big digital native players are actually trying to build ecosystem around AI. Now let's go each of these themes one by one. Now the very first one, as I said, is about, are you going to be doing AI just for automation? That's the theme of the day in the media most of the time because people are fearing about their jobs. And in fact, the point we're making is that it's not only about efficiency, it's actually a lot about growth. Now, this is the picture from the different surveys we have across the globe, but typically if you look at the statement about why people are leveraging AI tool into their corporation, give and take 25 to 30% of the time, they do it actually to expand the product space or the pricing of the service space. 70% of the case, indeed, there is a bit of effectiveness or efficiency. But what is interesting as well is that on the efficiency side, we tend to be focused too much on one efficiency element, which is labor substitution for smart capital. In fact, a lot of the use case today in AI can be efficiency driven, but not necessarily people driven. The actual efficiency of capital. If you think about preventive maintenance through AI tools, most of the time that's improving capital efficiency by substituting old capital that is maintained longer so you don't have to reinvent and reinject them by smart capital tools. So the message here is, again, careful. It's not only about automation of labor. It's a lot of preventive maintenance. It's a lot about outsourcing and possibly some manipulation as well on the non-labor cost in terms of your supply chain. And for most, it's actually a growth framework. Now, in fact, I've shown you that the picture is pretty much the same whether you are in Europe, in the US, or you are in Asia. If you look by industries, the same picture seems to apply. Now, obviously, with a bit of differences, if you are in telecommunications, for instance, in telecommunications, you tend to be more using AI in the hope of capturing more market share or to increase the markets or increasing a new ways to get new segments. Now, what you see, obviously, if you take transport and logistics, the growing the market share or growing the market is likely less evident than reducing the labor efficiency through automation. So all that is natural. But again, whether the picture is across sector or across the different continents and countries, the pictures remain the same. You know, don't think only about efficiency, think really about growth. Now, what's the economics? We've looked at all these cases, and this is the reason why we believe that growth pays off much better than just efficiency per se. And in fact, what we have segmented, we segmented people that obviously are already using a lot of these technologies in the fast-paced scenarios, what we call the fast AI adopters, which typically think about the AI case from an innovation, products, and services perspective in the hope to resegment the market to a larger market or simply to be competitive. In the other extremes, you got people that basically says, look, no, I'm actually pretty much AI resistant at this stage. I haven't done my digital transformation, so I'm very, very careful. And in between, you got possibly some people that really wants to use AI because of the efficiency it delivers. I just want simply to substitute expensive type of workforce for the efficiency of automation. Now, when we look at all the data, what we find out is that where we compare at each stage of the innovation cycle, innovation versus efficiency, there is pretty much a 3 to 4 points of difference of growth that we see in the profit growth. 4 points on average versus an average net margins of 15% in pretty much every industry, sometimes 20, 25. But bottom line, there's a significant upside in the profit if you can play on the growth framework. Evidently, if you don't do AI, you are likely to be in the negative. Now, why is it so? But remember, growth is not only something that your competitors will do and extend the market. They are likely to start to steal from your own product space. And in fact, this is one of the inside of AI, which is the way people develop these technologies. And on the growth side, usually half of it comes at the expense of somebody not necessarily moving very fast. When we ask the questions, by the way, to people, and obviously we have the use case behind that, that's exactly what we find. People think that AI adoptions, either by digital attackers or by other incumbents, which are competitors to your own industry, there is, 20% of the people who are not adopting, thinking that it's actually a significant loss of profit due to the market stealing element that you have. Now, let me give you an example about that and how these things can happen. So possibly some of you are, like me, a fan of sushi. And if you think about sushi chain, for instance, some people will have in their mind Nobu, the classical branded sushi company, where obviously there the chef do fantastic foods and you're pretty much served on the table, and each of us, we possibly have a waiter there to address our needs. So you can imagine that Nobu by itself is very people intensive, and at the end of the day, it's obviously a very talent intensive business model, because the chef has to have 10 years of minimal practice of sushi to be able to cut the fish, and let alone if you are the best chef at a chain like Nobu, you possibly have 25 years of experience, and you are obviously quite renowned. Now, take the other case of companies like Kuro and Kura in Japan. The company is one of these companies that serves sushi over rice bowls on a classical automated conveyor belt. And possibly some of you have been already in such kind of restaurants of sushi with the conveyor belt. Now, the thing about these guys, they not only automated that, so that means that obviously the number of people to serve is much lower. That's an efficiency game. But no, they are using AI systematically on top of the automation of the belt, i.e. on each of the portions or the boards of the sushi that you have, they basically use sensors, and the sensors capture everything that you as a customer you are eating. The benefit of that from an AI point of view is that the data can feed directly into the kitchen and actually reserve some of the people if there are some type of a missing salmon. In the same time, from the data that they capture in your position, they can actually personalize the service and push certain type of dishes to the benefit of the customers. And by the way, there is a way to optimize the stocks and be just in time. The consequence of that is that the profitability of the chain increase. And by the way, because there's much less people, there is actually a much better way to have less waste. They actually can price much lower than a Nobu, which means that they increase the market segment quite significantly. The consequence of that is that you got these kind of chains that today are very efficient on AI, less people. They rely people to basically use the big data analysis and create the insight at each of the retail store. But in the same time, they basically recreate new segments with lower price for the young kids or the teenagers who are not necessarily able or willing to pay the price fee or the fees of what's happening in Nobu. And finally, they compete with Nobu as well, because at the end of the day, some of the Nobu fans say, look, I don't have to be sitting for so many hours in the Nobu restaurants. I still enjoy the quality of the fresh sushi I can get there. Bottom line, they have increased the price space. They have competed away part of the Nobu, and are much more profitable. The consequence of that in Japan today is that if you look at the sushi market, it's slightly going down. Nobu is struggling. And at the same time, the new chains, as I told you, through the automation and to the AI, are actually expanding on the world and are actually expanding the profit quite dramatically. That's what we're talking about here in terms of the growth. Now, the consequence of that is that if there is so much growth and there is so much of competition, maybe you have to look at your back and see what the competitors are doing. And we have analyzed that. And in fact, from the data, we come to an interesting conclusion, which is that the probability for someone to start to invest in AI is actually 50% driven by the fact that he's aware his competitors is doing it. 50%. That's a very high social contagion effect. If you think about technologies like the early web technologies, the contagion effect, or the competitive effect as I call it, was more in the range of 20-25%. So it's actually a very important element of contagion. So that technology race should translate in something. And in fact, we have modeled that in the pace of diffusion. And in fact, when you start to put these numbers all together, if today 3%, as I said, are fully diffused end-to-end in the AI technologies, the predictions based on the simple econometrics of the social contagions suggest that the pace of innovation with competition can actually go to 60% of the companies in the horizon of the next 20 years that will be actually using the full-fledged of AI. 20 years, 60, 70%, that's pretty much the example of what I told you about the first access web technology 20 years ago. So pretty much the same, pace of development, and that pace of development is obviously linked to the competition that we have. So we are more in the high end of the diffusion than the low end of the diffusion. So you should not wait too much, because in the next 5 years, a lot of companies will be fully diffused and will leverage that for their own cost economics, but possibly for their own growth at your own expense. Now, that's my first point. My first point is that don't wait. The dynamics are actually very contagious. And on top of that, they are contagious because the economics are not only about internal cost cutting, it's a lot about growth potential. Now let's go to the second one, which is, okay, if I do this and I redefine all my internal company processes and the like, what do I need to get? Because technology is a backbone, but behind the processes and the like, what are the skills that I need? Now, in fact, let's stand back 1 second and let's go back into the different ways of technologies of the past, and let's look backwards. And in this example, I'm taking the US, but it's pretty much the same if you are from Europe and from Asia for the statistics that we have. We look at the cumulative change in employment share and the cumulative change in real wage in the last 30 years. So if you have bottom line high cognitive skills and high interaction social skills, what you see is that the cumulative change in employment share has been 27% more. So the demand for jobs that bundle social skills and cognitive skills has been in quite high demand, 27% higher in the mix versus minus 7% if you are basically a non-geek with no social skills, where it's going to be minus 7. Okay, so 27% across 30 years is pretty much 0.7 points of increase in social and cognitive skills happening in the trend. And there's social and obviously cognitive skills. But bottom line, between 0.5 to 1% every year, we've got to push towards more intensity of cognitive skills and more social skills. So we all know technology is not neutral. It's actually evolving towards these skills. What is interesting today, even if AI is just at the beginning, and this is research done by OECD's in quite deep detail using alternative data from the ONET and the PACC data, what they find out is that, in fact, the demand is decreasing only by 1 point a year, but still there is already a gap and shortage in social and cognitive skills, where in fact there is obviously a surplus starting to build in routine and physical skills and abilities already today in the first wave of normal ICT technology. So we are already in a stress situation where we can imagine that with AI, these things would actually become possibly worse. And in fact, we have done a lot of the analysis in trying to understand the skill categories and the push based on example of companies who have told us about how do they think about HR and the skills they require to make sure they can leverage AI both on the usage side but also on the producing side. And what we find out is a very interesting pattern. The pattern is obviously that cognitive skills are still important, but they're not necessarily that as important as we hope they will be for us, because we are obviously the one with the cognitive skills. AI start to be sufficiently strong to actually do some of the cognitive skills that we have. And in fact, in information retrieval, on recognizing known patterns, obviously computers and AI is able to do it as much, as easy and as well as we do. So in fact, the trend of cognitive skills is actually going down. That's the symptoms of labor substitution. The social and emotional skills are starting to increase, but the one that is the most striking is all linked to the social emotional reasoning and creativity. Now, that's the case of Sweden. We have that for many countries. But if you start to look back at this data and compare to the past, the give and take that you should have in mind here is that the social skill trend is likely to be built up to be twice as fast as what we've seen in the past. The cognitive skill trend will still be positive, but half the rate of what it is in the past. And creativity will be extremely important more than anything else. Now, for the anecdote, there are already a lot of companies actually taking consequence of these findings and try to actually stimulate creativity of their own HR. Now, I cannot give you the name of the companies for confidential reasons, but two clients of mine, for instance, have systematically thought about actually creating logistics where you got, sleeping rooms, and the sleeping rooms are simply there not for people to relax, but to engage people to go in the REM sleep to make sure that they can actually reboost creativity, as an example. In the same way, the same client said not only sleeping room on one side, but as actually a room where you can practice any type of sports, just as a way to refresh and make sure that you oxygen your brain and you actually motivate your own creativity. So think about the future of work in itself, the design of it. It's not only that you want people to be more social, but you need to give them the flexibility of environment in such a way that it stimulates creativity by itself. Another client of mine obviously took the consequence and say AI by itself can actually paint, and we can give tons of different paintings and actually paint something, and they have actually some of the managers painting on top of the AI in collaboration with the AI to actually create that stimulus and that stimulation and creativity to work with the machine. So again, these are extreme examples, but I tell you as well that the future of work tomorrow is going to be a lot about creativity and stimulating the brain for something that today is yet to be fully codified in machine learning. Now, the consequence of that, when we ask people, and especially the early AI adopters, they exactly tell us that. They say, look, we have a problem. We cannot find skills and the right people skills to interface and complement the AI technologies, and actually higher than the classical technical problems of not having enough of engineers, big data, IoT type of persons to basically roll out the supply chain of the technology. So it's a lot of the usage side of the technology that creates a skill issue. Finally, the managerial capability is also very difficult because the managerial jobs, most of the time from an organization point of view, is still possibly order and commands and not necessarily as creative as AI will require in the future. So the interesting thing is that technology is actually cheap. Technology is a backbone, but what do you do with the technology, i.e. you have the skills to leverage it, is actually the major bottleneck that we start to see. So it's an HR problem, which is fundamental. Now, we start to see a lot of companies trying to fix the problem and try to look at the potential of finding new ways to acquire customers, acquire new people. There's the onboarding, hiring stuff. There's the contractual element to that, remote sourcing, and basically leverage skills somewhere else. There is obviously the training skills. Again, today, we see different models. Walmart, from its strategic point of view, is slightly more in the shrinking part and displace of the people, when at the same time trying to reskill. That's the example as well of the telecom industry, like what AT&T is roughly doing in the US. But you can see that at this stage, a lot of the companies are actually betting on one or two posture. The one that basically go on the hiring, contracting, and everything else to actually expand the workforce are still today the digital natives that actually are trying to optimize any levers for finding this war for talent. Now, again, I'm talking here about people across all the business system. The things I have not talked too much about is that the HR function itself is prone to be AI driven. And in fact, people analytics is starting to be a fundamental battleground for HR quality. And the best HR departments are actually extremely leveraging AI for upskilling, for training, for contractual and hiring. Think about Unilever, for instance, is systematic in using AI and AI analytics to make sure that they can pretty much hire the right people in a much smaller time than before. In fact, the process of Unilever's tend to be something like 4 months before somebody can be hired. Today, this process has been shortened from 4 months to 4 weeks to hire somebody, and the self-selection and the onboarding success rate is possibly twice as it was before. So HR will be revolutionized, and the way the skills that you need will also be totally changed. So that's point number 2. Let's go to point number 3, which is be bold. Now, we knew, or possibly we start to know, that there is a bit of a winner's take all in digital transformation. And we have put in some research, some of which have been published in the Sloan Management Review as well, courtesy of Paul. We look at the picture of what exactly happens. And the point is very simple. Digitalization is always value destroying simply because there is this extra competition coming into your space, i.e. digital natives, and on the side possibly people coming out of the boundary of their own industry and coming to your own industry. Classical example is obviously all digital service that telecom providers wants to do, i.e. mobile banking, IoT, and you name it. The second point is that the digital, the early movers tend to have the advantage. Most of the time what we see is that because they are the first, they understand the technology, they learn from the technology, they learn from the new business model, and typically they create a better potential. And the digital reinventors, i.e. the guys that not only are early movers, but along the way fundamentally change the business model. Possibly they move to a platform game or whatever else, are the guys who are actually creating the largest revenue growth and the largest EBIT growth. That's a fact. Now, what do we see in the AI space? And in fact, our research and discussing as well with a different use case of our clients, we find the same pattern, but we find the pattern to be even stronger. Whatever the sectors we take, whether it's high tech, retail, and the like, we are very clear that if you are a non-AI adopter, your relative profits start to decline. And if you are adopter with a reinvention strategy, it starts to go up. Now, depending on the sectors, the effect of the reinvention is stronger versus the weakness of not adopting. But the bottom line is actually a very strong bifurcation. If you do it, you get the chance to increase your profit pool. If you don't do it today, competition is such that they start to eat away your lunch, and the non-AI adopters are starting on average to see a profit drain. That was very striking to us, whatever case we look at, because we are only at the beginning of that deployment of what we've seen. Now, again, some of you could say, well, that's possibly biased because the AI adopters with reinvention strategy, there are not that many. It's usually AI adopters are the digital natives, so they can attack easily. They don't have a legacy business. My argumentation still old. I think we look at a lot of incumbents. We've worked with incumbents that are reinventing themselves, adding AI tools to the digital transformation, and we find exactly the same thing. Now, it takes guts. Think about in automotive industry and think about, Uber. Uber obviously create a bit of a change in the mindset of the automotive industry. If you think about BMW says, look, I have no choice but to think about reinventing myself. And again, the BMW is an interesting case because the way they think about that is it's a platform business model where in fact they will have a platform where you can hire a car on demand either for just 1 minute, it could be with a chauffeur, it could be without a chauffeur. So they will mix a lot of the different services with their own cars and possibly self-driving cars, possibly electricity-based cars and the like. But they will create a platform by itself will radically change the business model of BMW, and not being simply a car, a nice car that you can buy somewhere to a sales agent, but it's basically available car that you can use as a service, and possibly with multiple dimension of the services. You can drive, you cannot drive, you can have somebody driving for you, you can rent it for the day, you can rent it for the month, and you name it. So it requires a full reinvention, because obviously in this case, what do you do with the sales agents? The sales agents obviously will be disintermediated. It takes obviously a bit of the cannibalization and a strong challenge, but that's all AI adoption will pay off. Now, another logic why digital reinvention and bold will pay off is that de facto, if we are successful, is because we have mechanisms of cross-subsidization in the value chain. And proactively shaping that value chain will change the different, cross-subsidization aspect and create and put you in a new good position, a new value chain. Taking my example of BMW, obviously the customer, the sales channels was obviously, it's still very prevalent in terms of the sales channels as it is today, in terms of the BMW store. But in the long term, that cross-subsidization can actually disappear, because the customer-facing experience, the direct experience, the collection of data from that feedback loop is actually strategically very important. So it's better for BMW not to be on the back end of the customers, but really at the center of gravity of that interface with the customers and the data that they got. That's what we call digital reinvention. Point number two, there is an advantage of being bold as a leadership. When you're bold, you have to bypass internal reluctance. And if you can do it, then you can move. If you don't do it, there's always pockets of resistance, and you're possibly going to be a prey for somebody else who is successful in being itself a disruptor. Point number three, as I discussed, the growth potential of AI is quite mind-boggling in terms of new business model, new service, new segmentation, and the like. So in fact, being bold, it's actually a new business model, a new way to grow, a new way to expand influence. And finally, it's not easy. And that means that it's not easy. You're possibly going to be one of the few who dare to do it, and one of the few who dare to do it and who can be successful in doing it. So as a selection bias, if you are that person, you're likely to reap off a lot of the benefits. That goes to my point number four that I've been already alluding to, which is AI is actually turbocharging digital, but digital should not be neglected. It's the backbone of what AI can deliver. I go back to the analysis about what drives people to adopt. In fact, the second biggest drivers of adoption of AI, the first one being, is my competitors doing it because I feel the heat, is actually the fact that I'm actually very good in my digital stock of capabilities and technologies, i.e., if I want big data, I need the right IT architecture behind that to make sure this big data can be used. And on top of that, I possibly have learned to redesign my business model and reinvent myself so I can expand my business model through AI because of digitization. So no surprisingly, the two biggest driver of AI is competition and the legacy of digital, much slightly better than the classical perceived value of AI per itself. So it's not the ROI of the use case, which is interesting, is do you have the digital legacy to execute, and do you feel the need to go fast because there's possibly a tipping point of competition that's going to come into your face. Now, in fact, the evidence is very strong. So if you look by sectors and you look at the digital maturity of different sectors in terms of how many companies are using and diffusing big data, clouds, mobile, and web technologies in terms of their full enterprise, and you correlate that with the first round of AI adoption by sectors, what you see is that there's pretty much a one-to-one correlation. The more digital savvy you are, the more AI you are likely to be or to jump into the AI the AI race. In fact, what is interesting is that what is behind that? We can all understand that there's a technology infrastructure that can benefit that. We ask and we look in detail. From all the respondents of the use case, they tell us an interesting things. So first of all, they confirm that 75% of the case, there is a dependency between the AI deployment and the digital transformation success that you have done. So 75%, you are going to be different something. What is more interesting is that look at the number one. AI tools can be adopted independently of previous digital technologies, but require some capabilities acquired in rolling out technologies. It's actually the largest one. So it's actually, like we've said in the HR discussion, it's a lot about skills and capabilities and learning abilities of how to cope with digital. That matters a lot and can be leveraged into AI. In fact, we think it's actually the biggest element of the success of digital transformation is to learn how to cope with digital technologies in the day-to-day business environment. And in fact, if you look here, I did the work in saying, let's look at who has, as a sector, the more digital skill intensity versus the adoptions. And you see exactly the same curve, which is that the more digital skills you have, the easiest the AI adoptions will be, and the more necessary it is for you to adopt AI, simply because your competitors are likely to have the right digital skills to actually themselves start the technology race of investing in AI. So indeed, if we come back to the point number 2, HR is quite important. Now, the very final point is number 5, ecosystem must be leveraged. Now, here I'm not talking about ecosystem in the sense of, platform or digital platform. I'm talking really about the ecosystem of the building blocks for you to make sure that you get the right environment for having all the skills, competence that you need for rolling out your AI strategy successfully. Now, what we see most of the time, and we can, give you a lot of examples from, the Tesla ecosystem to Beidou to what a Walmart or UPS does. But most of the time, they basically try to make sure that they reconnect, obviously, to academia. They basically make sure that they connect to the innovation talent pool. They basically look at service providers because sometimes it's very difficult to get all the elements of the AI inside into the house. And most of the time, sometimes you really have to think about the model of competition because possibly you don't have all the data and all the capabilities that you need from an industry perspective to continue to grow. So a few examples of that. If you think about, Beidou is obviously very well known as, the search engine in China that is extremely successful. Like in the case of Google, they obviously started to diversify, invest, especially in the context of the self-driving cars, which has been heavily promoted to social media. But again, if you think about themselves, they basically have to build a 1,000 to 2,000 R&D staff sufficiently strong that they can actually be very good in big data, in deep learning exercise, in big data labs, etc. So the only way to do this is obviously to create aggressive partnership with some of the biggest universities in China and develop themselves their own institutes where people can come, learn the tricks, and basically work and cooperate with Beidou. They built the Institute of Deep Learning, for instance. They did. They have built a Silicon Valley AI lab as well that focus on deep learning, hardware, and overall AI. That's an example. They do cooperation as well on the academia side or on the science side. Obviously, it's a cooperation with the best technical universities in China, possibly sponsor and partners with the government of China. But again, there is a sort of the point of saying these technologies are starting to mature. They are improving by the day, especially in terms of machine learning, and being the first to experiment on those tests in the academic environment for a commercial deployment is actually a no-brainer and possibly a great way to be fast into the market and be on the competitive edge of these technologies. And finally, they've built a lot of joint venture. Why? Because they diversified outside of the core of the search engine, for instance. As I said, they basically look at a self-driving car. So they obviously had to partner with different players in the ecosystem of the car market, and obviously on the consumer electronics of the car markets like Harman and motors like BIC. So bottom line, the point I want to make is that when you start your AI, don't try to do everything by yourself. It's not yet a mature set of technologies. There is still a challenge of war for talent and a minimum size of AI pool of talent that you need to get, and possibly these guys will work more in an innovation lab environment. And most of the use case that you will do will redesign your business model, but will expand outside of the core and possibly an ecosystem where you have no choice but to partner to create enough of a brand awareness and scalability for the model to be successful. I stop here and try to summarize what hopefully came across from this discussion. The point number one I made is that I think the question whether AI is a technical possibility, we start to be all convinced. The fact that AI can be an economic possibility, we start to see a lot of use cases that tend to say the ROI is sufficiently positive, versatile across any type of use case and functions of the enterprise. But the most fundamental discussion here is, okay, if this use case are successful, how do I organize myself as a management and structure my AI strategy? What I try to say is that there are at least 2 or 3 or 5 elements that you need to keep in mind if you want to be successful. If you develop an AI strategy, make sure that it's as much about growth potential than efficiency, and do it fast because it's a technology race. The point number 2, don't think only technology. The AI technology are so intrusive and so effective that you need to reorganize a lot of the business system and the cognitive functions that you have, enhance its cognitive functions to social and creativity functions that requires new type of people, new type of organization. So that dimension is possibly as important as the ability to ingest this technology into the business system. Point number 3, these technologies are so versatile and so fundamental. Don't go for marginal economics, go for the bold move. And the beauty of the bold move is that if you are successful, you are likely to shape the benefit of the market for yourself, both at the core and outside the core. Point number 4 I made, digital, it is no leapfrog. You're going to need to learn even the first 01 of digital, because AI are not very easy technologies, and the consequence of technology and business system is not something that you learn from next day. You're going to have to make sure that your digital transformation is actually moving ahead before you can do the AI. And point number 5, yes, obviously, it's all about digital ecosystem and business model. But currently, the AI building blocks are not fully integrated, and there is still a lot of scopes to create the right ecosystem of talent between university, governments, but also other ecosystem of industry to make sure that you have all the leverage to make sure that your AI is successful. Thank you.
And Why don't we extend the program by about 10 minutes so we can get to a few of the audience's questions. And audience, if you can hang around for a few minutes, we welcome you to, and thank you for your great generosity. Your curiosity is fantastic. Jacques, let's begin with a question about leapfrogging, since you were just making a point about that. Understanding that there are certain aspects of the digital transformation that need to be in place first. How does an organization know when it's ready for AI? What are kind of the key fundamentals it has to have in place first?
Very good question. There's no fixed rule. I would say it's also a few building blocks that you have to have in mind. The way I suggest usually it's art as much as science, is that at the end of the day, you know when you're going to be ready, when actually the technology is part of the business or the day-to-day business. Technology is extremely effective when the technology is actually not visible. It's actually running extremely smooth and the like. AI will then enhance even more of this impact. So that's the first element. Technology should be seamless, and the use case are really about the using side, not from the supply side of the technology or the IT department. It's really about that is quite important. The second aspect, which is important when you know you are ready, is that you are to be ready from the mindset point of view. In digital already, if you are not necessarily changing the boundaries of your business model, AI will possibly help you at the margin, possibly to cut a bit more of the efficiency, possibly improve a bit of the call center. But at the end of the day, the leverage of this technology will be actually minimal. So the second point is that you cannot jump into AI if you don't have a real thinking through about what exactly are the next boundary of my company that I want to explore, and have I done that within the first set of digital technologies. Point number 3, a management team is quite important. It comes from the top and it's actually disseminate to the bottom. That means that you need not only a CEO that push it, you need a management team to push it, and the managers who are actually responsible for each of their team to actually transpire and basically go with the leadership of that. Usually what we find out is that if you don't have that impetus at the level of all the enterprise, things will fail. And the reason is very simple. Technology is only successful when it's transparent. And it's only transparent when it's ingrained into the day-to-day use of each of us. And each of us needs to be actually nurtured, and leaders should nurture us to make sure that we use these technologies. That's a few of the principles I would suggest. Last but not least, because I think there's a question about how do we know this technology scale? And should we directly invest in this technology, yes or no? The point is that these technologies are actually improving by the day. So there is a case to say, why not to still wait 1 year or 2 years when the cost curve of these technologies are even more effective? My argumentation there will be, don't necessarily bet on it. The case will possibly be better. But the value of experimenting in a few use cases and learn from this use case are worth much more than the costs or the ROI, the technical ROI of 2 years of better cost curve that you are likely to perceive from this technology. So the experimentation element is actually important. And if you have not done it, if you have a culture of fast experimentation, it's time to do it as fast as you can.
Very good, thank you. So thinking about some specific applications of AI, we had several people ask us about the use of AI in the HR and talent functions, its potential in hiring, in identifying top performers. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and I think that, it is the statement I made, which is the future is about new skills. So the HR function is going to have to manage these kind of new skills. The new skills are the social emotionals, but at the same time, they are also the digital element of these skills. So there are 2 dimensions here that HR will need to be deployed. And at the same time, HR is not there to look at what's happening in the supply chain, what's happening in the marketing and sales. Is going to have to basically manage the HR flow. And that means that the first thing he needs to do, if he wants to understand what he has to do for the rest of the organization, is himself to be actually, or herself to be actually AI savvy. And what we see today is that one of the killer application of AI is actually driven by data analytics at the behavior of most of the talents. The best companies are actually pretty much all of them are already invested into AI analytics. They do it in many ways. So again, when we talk about AI analytics, remember as well that AI is a foundation of digital. So most of the time, again, on the onboarding situation of Unilever, for instance, they use social media as a digital foundations to actually advertise and basically personalize and try to spot outside the type of profile they want to have. In the same times, from the data they receive, they basically target certain pockets of type of individuals based on the skills requirements that they've anticipated from the social media. And then they use the AI tools to actually do the first conversation. Most of these companies like Unilever don't have necessarily people spending the time at the onboarding in the first selection, but actually have the AI itself to self-select based on the first dialogue, sometimes based on the analysis of different type of CVs and pattern of CVs to actually reduce the funnel, and then the funnel obviously becomes much easier. The interesting thing, by the way, is that in most of these companies, HR remains HR. The final say is actually the individual or the head of HR making the final decision of hiring the onboarding in the case of Unilever. But at this stage, he knows that it will be done much faster. He knows that there's 90% of the time the system is actually filtered the funnel towards a good up to a close and excellent match. So most of the time there is no waste, and it's enhanced decision and a very easy helping decision. So again, to the question about is it a use case that is a no-brainer? I think it's one of the use cases that's going to be fundamental simply because the war for talent is actually more and more relevant. And today, AI is possibly a very interesting way to do that because the markers of what we need in the future, i.e. social elements, emotional elements, ability to work in team, and blending of technical things is not markers that typically you receive on a CV. It has to be a blended of social media interactions, your friends and the like, that will actually create the sum of markers to maximize the probability of this is the right person I want to onboard in my company.
Thank you, Jacques. And we'll take this as the last question, and I'll ask you to answer it quickly, although it may be difficult to do so. Several people have wanted to know your thoughts on what kinds of controls and security issues we should be thinking about with respect to AI, particularly as a self-learning technology.
Yeah, I can talk about it for 1 hour, but it's actually a building block of the management team as well. I think you cannot do an AI without having both the cyber security and even an ethical philosophy behind that. At the end of the day, the more we use these technologies, the more you open certain type of interactions and possibly some type of leakage of data by the machine or the interaction with the machine that could be quite strong. So I always encourage that cybersecurity is actually non-negotiable. It should be it should be there, and it should be something that you have to impose as a mandate, especially for your IT department. I also believe, and I encourage personally in my case with my clients, to get at least a discussion in terms of the sense of the values that your company has and how the value and the ethical element of those values can be challenged by AI. I think it's fundamental to have that discussions because there could be a collision. And, whether you impose a control, there's a minimum control as well. But I think there is also a culture of experimentation. As a classical example, if I quote McKinsey, for instance, as an organization, we've got pretty much some people trying to trick us all the time in terms of the data analytics that we do, the leakage that could happen, the kind of AI tools that we use in cooperation with very different people, just to make sure that at the end of the day, we learn by doing, by testing, and by making sure that we understand that sometimes things could be wrong, could go wrong. So the ethical question is fundamental of the bad and good, but actually a lot of the leakage comes from good intent, but bad experimentation. So I encourage you to think a lot about that experimentation potential as well.
Jacques, thank you very much. And audience, thank you very much, especially the many of you who hung on for our extra time Q&A. Over the next few days, please look for a feedback survey that we'll send out via email, and we greatly appreciate your thoughts and opinions. A reminder that a recording of this program will be available within 3 to 4 business days. And that concludes our program. Thank you for attending, and thank you again to our presenter, Jacques Bughin, and to our sponsor, Cloudera. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.